Welcome, yeah, right. Welcome to another week's consideration of the celestial dance that we are underway. And I am inviting you to, you know, this scene that you see behind me as kind of a potential respite to the cacophony, shall we call it, of what's going on so many levels here in the current world situation. Wars, storms, political rivalry. Earlier this week, as I was, tapped on the shoulder, if you will, by someone who I follow quite a bit, Michael Meade. He presented a consideration that he called how to not be overwhelmed, which, if you really look at all the things that are going on in the world these days, that potential for overwhelm, it exists. And he spells out a scenario that I sense could be of assistance as we actually ferret our way through, or slog our way through, if you will, the incredible versions of what it is that is going on around us. And I'm just going to play a small excerpt from his presentation here. Whoops, gotta go back. Because if I played it now, you wouldn't hear it. There we go. Now, the subject matter for this consideration, how not to be overwhelmed. And this is just going to take a few minutes, so sit back and enjoy Michael Meade's capability of presenting story time.
We're living, I'm repeating a little bit, but we're living through the shattering of paradigms and through the rattling of all the institutions that were intended to protect us. And that's an extreme challenge to find a way to a world that rattles like that. And yet, all the old stories and all the old imaginations, cosmological imaginations of life, say that whatever shatters the common patterns also opens us up to psychological and even mythological levels of unusual depth that cannot be overwhelmed by the conditions of the world. In other words, it's not just that we need to turn inside, but also the deep self is trying to become more known at this time. So, in times of radical change and great uncertainty, we can find the exact conditions that can allow this opening and expanding, more conscious becoming of the deep self and the deep soul. I mean, that's maybe the core thing I'm trying to say, that the soul is not overwhelmed, the deep self is not overwhelmed, but they are trying to respond to what the ego cannot deal with and to what the committees throughout the world cannot conceive of. So the usual way to get at this stuff is through a story. One of the big problems in the world right now is people think they're in different stories. People are in one story and they say the other people are in some other story, and their story doesn't count, their lives don't count, and their way of being doesn't matter, and all that kind of thing. The divisiveness in the world separating people more and more. And then one thing to understand is we are in the story of everything becoming divided. That's the story we are in. And so there's many versions of that in mythology, and I want to summarize one that's one of my favorites, but it's also very brief, and it has this wisdom in it that's done or presented in a very brief pattern. And some of you will know it because I tell it often, because it gets to the root of the matter quickly. And so this is a story from Native American traditions. It's told by a number of tribes in North America, and it involves a cave. And there's different versions, but the stories basically say there's a cave in which is all the knowledge that we're seeking, all the knowledge that we need. And they say, if you found that cave, if you looked into it, what you would see is an old woman sitting in the cave, weaving a beautiful garment, and she's been weaving it for a long time. And she's about to finish the trim of this beautiful garment, and she wants it to be unique and special, and so she's weaving the trim with porcupine quills. And in order to weave them, she has to bite down and flatten them, and she's been biting down on porcupine quills for so long, she has worn her teeth down to nothing but nubs above the gums. But still, she keeps biting on the quills and flattening them. And as she does so, it occurs every once in a while that she has to go to the back of the cave, because at the back of the cave, there's a fire. Some people say it's the most ancient thing in the world. And hanging over the fire, there's a cauldron. And in the cauldron, there are all the seeds of all the trees and all the bushes and all the plants and all the grains and all the flowers. And if the stew of seeds that are in the cauldron are not stirred every once in a while, they will burn. And if those seeds burn, then there won't be any more forests or any more bushes or grains or flowers. And so the old woman puts down this beautiful garment, the most beautiful garment anyone has ever seen, and she lays it down on the floor of the cave, and she goes to the back of the cave to stir the stew of seeds. And while she's going back, she moves slowly. She's been working so hard for so long. She moves slowly as she goes. And as she's doing that, the black dog, what that black dog? The black dog comes over to the beautiful garment where it lays on the floor of the cave, and it sees a loose thread, and it can't help it. The black dog begins to tug on the thread, and the dog tugs on the thread until the entire beautiful garment has been unraveled and is now laying in a chaotic mess on the floor. And when the old woman comes back and she sees all of her creative work turned into chaos laying on the floor, she just stands still for a moment. And maybe in our way of thinking, maybe she stands in a depth of overwhelm. The story doesn't say, but after a while, the old woman sits down. And when she sits down, she herself sees a loose thread, and she picks up the thread. And as soon as she touches the thread, she gets a new vision of an even more beautiful garment. And once she gets that, she begins to weave again, just as she's been doing before. But now she's weaving a new version of the garment, a new imagination of what can be woven out of the threads of life. And this is the story told by the elders when the world becomes overwhelming. And some people might say, damn that black dog. If it wasn't for the dog, the old woman would have finished the garment. It would have been perfect. And they forget that the word perfect means finished and done. Through the form is what it means. And therefore, perfection is a kind of death. If the old woman were to finish the garment, it would all die, because the old woman is the old woman who's weaving the world. And so the elders say when they tell the story, tolerate the chaos, tolerate whatever it is that unravels life and overwhelms your life, because we are here not simply to have balance or have an even road or simply survive. We are here to see the thread that is beckoning to us. If we can find the thread that's calling to us and pick that thread up, then something alights inside our own psyche. Some switch is flipped, and we begin to see the way we're supposed to see the world. And when that happens, we begin to perceive our own way of living, our own destiny, you could say. And then all that we have to do, no matter the conditions of the world, is hold on to that thread and learn how to weave that thread of imagination, that thread of genius, that thread of creation back into the world. That's what the old people say when they're telling the story, and they tell the story when everyone is feeling overwhelmed.
Well, there's some ponderables for the consideration of, how is it that we, at this current time, can be invited into a willingness, to accept what it is that is afoot. And see it as an opportunity for beginning anew with a creative endeavor that has been, awaiting this moment. And not succumb so readily to the overwhelm, as was emphasized in this part of the story. Every week I sit down, actually, all the time. I'm peering, over the shoulders of the universe to see what is or are the current astrological planetary moves that are underway. And each week I try to, from my perspective, because after all, I'm one that's sitting here telling you this story. And it is a story. The planets are telling us a story all the time. If we but, really learn how to listen appropriately. We're in the season right now of Libra. And, Libra's those scales, the balancing of justice, if you will. It's also the realm of relationship. How do we envision our version of this realm of relationship? Is it, are the scales tipped, way too much one way or the other as we interact with each other, trying to ferret out a balance of some kind in which, everyone can be, appreciated for what they are? It is an option. It's going to take work, That's just the way it is. So, glancing at the stars, glancing at the planets in our week-long thing here. This is the last full week, by the way, of the season of Libra. And happy birthday to all you that are born in this latter part of the Libra season. This week, I'm going to direct my focus to Venus, the ruler of Libra, which is currently, worked its way through over this last month, the realm of Scorpio. And by the end of this week, it's going to advance into the season, the zone, the dance moves, if you will, of Sagittarius, which is a very different flavor than Scorpio. Each of these signs lays a foundation for the next. Like right now, we're in Libra season. So we're laying the foundations for what it is that is going to transpire once the sun moves into that realm of Scorpio. Venus, the ruler of Libra, has been dancing its way through Scorpio, giving us the potential for some insight that we can utilize if we're but paying attention as to just how is it that our interaction capacity with one another is going to be ready for the intensity, if you will, of the Scorpio realm, of that interactive, zone of intimacy that Scorpio represents. And even as I say the word or the term intimacy, the awareness, the awakening awareness of, how focused, how intense, if you will, are we going to be willing to take that next step into that interactive zone of how we're going to dance with one another. Scorpio, this is a realm where shared resources are up front. Taurus, the opposite thing, personal resources. And as we begin this week here on Monday, here's our Venus down here at 26 degrees of Scorpio in exact opposition to 26 degrees of Taurus, where retrograde Uranus is saying, in an opposite kind of way, are you paying attention to the opportunity to wake up? Here you can almost sense there's a potential, what shall we call it, a rattling. Yes, a rattling of the cage, if you will, of worth. Excuse me. Something that from the Taurian side is worthwhile to the individual is being shaken. And Venus opposite it over there in Scorpio is saying, might we be able to find, remember this is Venus, some level of cooperation where our versions of value might find commonality here. This is how this week begins, with Venus, the ruler of Libra, where our sun is still dancing for this week, being queried quite specifically. Something is afoot. I can feel the substance of change, if you will, is, very close to the surface. And why might this be the case? Well, Uranus is cage rattling, if you were, is done for a reason. It's to unseat us, if you will, from a zone where we're just too comfortable. There's a good Taurian term, comfort. And because of that comfort, we've reached a point where, change is not happening at a rate that, the universe beckons us to participate in. Venus opposed to Uranus as this week is initiated is saying, don't get too comfortable. How is the interaction space that you have with one another? There's that story that Michael was just talking about, Overwhelm is in the air. If we cannot but recognize the opportunity that is being presented to us to awaken ourselves to new opportunities. They're right there. They've always been there, and they always will be. I think of, I hear this term, speaking of rattling, being bandied about these days about misinformation. However, the reality is it is disinformation. The D in front of that is really the key, because misinformation is something that, like, oh, I was misinformed, whereas disinformation is deliberate, same D at work. And why? Well, who knows if there's an appropriate or good reason as to why. It is to, keep us off balance. There's a little of that Uranian flavor, as to what really is going on. So, as in Michael's story, being able to find a place, a zone where the scales of Libra are balanced, that we can actually sit down, see an opportunity, and move on it. Not in differentiation from other people's reality, but an enhancement of why it is that we are all here on this planet at this time. Beyond the misinformation. Anyway, this week begins with this version of Venus being tickled and saying, I sense that we need to find that equilibrium within, of course, ourselves first, to be able to be calm enough to see the opportunities that arise when we interact with one another. And as we go through the week, this is Venus. On this very same day, Venus is forming a trine to Neptune. Oh, and by the way, I misspoke last week. I think I said something about the fact that Neptune was stationing out of its retrograde dance into forward. It was Pluto I really meant to talk about. Sometimes when I'm in the heat of one of these, considerations for the week, I'll look at these two symbols, and I won't see that I'm not talking about Neptune, where this cross of matter spirit is punching up through the arc of creation. And in Pluto's case, the arc of creation is holding within its grasps the circle of infinity. And sometimes I just miss that when I'm looking quickly at all the changes that are afoot amongst these planetary characters. And these two have been in, sextile for a very long time, in and out of sextile. They're in a strong sextile at the moment. And sextile means that the energetic elements actually can communicate effectively with one another. There's a camaraderie, if you will, between earth and water signs. Also, the same thing could be said between fire and air signs. There's a camaraderie there that says, well, we may not necessarily agree on everything, but at least we're able to still have a conversation that is civil. We're going to zip through the week quickly because the next aspect actually happens on Thursday. On Thursday, we have the full moon at 24 degrees of Aries. You can kind of see it's a little before this 8 o'clock, and since the moon moves a degree every 2 hours, so about 2 in the morning, no, 4 in the morning, 6 in the morning, probably, real early in the morning. We get this full moon in Aries. And what might be the vision? And I look at the Sabian symbol from an astrological mandala. You can kind of see I have a well-worn book of this consideration by Dane Rudger. For this particular degree of the full moon, it reads, the possibility for a man to gain experience at 2 levels of being. Now think about this. This is a full moon in Aries across from what sign? Libra. A double sign. 2 levels of being. Are they vying for attention? It's a possibility. Are they seeking a camaraderie? Always. The keynote. A revelation of new potentialization. And further reading, in some unspecified way, the symbol is a guarantee that man can operate successfully at 2 levels of consciousness if he has previously met the condition mentioned in the preceding symbol. For you all, the preceding symbol reads, blown inward by the wind, the curtains of an open window take the shape of a cornucopia. And the keynote there is openness to the influx of spiritual energies. Back to our current symbol, be open. Be able and willing to shape your translucent mind in the form revealing spiritual fulfillment. And you will be able to experience life and power on inner as well as outer planes. The implied message is one of faith. Man can only truly experience what he deeply believes he can experience. It announces, this degree, the possibility of a new step in evolution, but it is still only a possibility, a promise. The individual is truly on probation. Can you feel into that potential that that particular Sabian symbol dance is asking us to ponder here? In our Libra moments, seeking that theoretical balance of, seemingly opposing realities that, are only opposing in the fact that they are not listening to one another. Is this the basis of something like war? Ponder that, if you will. That is imbalance, not what Libra is seeking. On this very same day, Thursday, you will notice that Venus here, 29 degrees, 46 minutes of Scorpio, and it's moving at a rate of, 1 degree, 12 minutes a day, which means that during this day, this is 8 o'clock in the morning, Venus is going to shift into Sagittarius. I want you to feel into that energy, coming out of the realm of Scorpio, where, the intensity of interactive space that we share with one another is being, all of a sudden invited, if you will, into the realm of Sagittarius, which is, unlimited capacities in direction that are open before us to levels of awareness that have always been there, but perhaps may have missed that road sign or overlooked that opportunity to awaken ourselves to something far more than what it is others may have told us was, this is a limit that you cannot go beyond. Sagittarius doesn't care about that kind of a statement. Oh, no, not. Sagittarius is unlimited. There is no culmination to how far one can go if you but are willing. And this Venus, is right now on Thursday inviting us into a level of that Libran justice scale to say, perhaps there's something else that's far more significant than kibitzing with one another over, the crumbs of societal reality that are going to potentially awaken us to aspects of who we are as soul beings, for why we came here on this planet at this time, to do something meaningful. Anyway, that's just sort of a little prep for the weekend. Something bigger is wanting to put in an appearance. We're in Friday right now. The weekend is almost there. And as we proceed through the weekend, see this yod here? We have a sextile between Neptune, Uranus. These two are talking, they're talking to each other. They're both retrograde. But, remember we started out this week's consideration with Venus in opposition to Uranus? And Uranus is always attempting to awaken us to options that we may not have considered. And sometimes the requirement is to rattle our cages substantially in order to do this. Neptune, in Pisces, our capacity, if you will, to visualize with a level of creative imagination things that we had not perceived to this point, being stimulated by Uranus, which is saying, wake up. Yes, take that chance. And this is known as a yod because we have these two inconjuncts, quincunxes, 5/12 of a circle, focusing in on the sun, the vitality of life, still in Libra. So, are we awakening ourselves to the possibility that there's a vitality in that Libra dance that we're doing with each other that is trying to percolate to the surface and say, listen to one another. We have things to share. It isn't all just about competition. There's a dynamic potential here if we but willingly step into that openly, honestly, with one another, as soul beings, who we truly are. I think of the Sabian symbols that were brought up for this week's consideration there as two levels. And we're able to hold both of these, of this life dance that we're doing here on planet Earth, the everyday, mechanical, if you will, kind of interaction potential that we have with one another, for whatever reasons and whatever paths that we're following on this Earth plane experience. Yet at the same time, our soul awareness, so much larger than this, often mechanical kind of existence that many would say is all there is. And yet from the soul perspective, from our heart perspective, I would dip back into that Libra consideration right now. Is my heart open? Am I willing to actually engage with you, which means hear you without the kerfuffle of imaginary thought collisions going on in my head, to be able to actually hear your soul trying to come through your words and awaken a potential that each of us is so close to. That's all I'm going to have to say for the astrology for this week, and, all the other tangents it may have led this lively astrologer out on. I can be reached at thelivellyastrologer.com or thelivellyastrologer@gmail.com. The individual chart is so much more dynamic than this shotgun approach of looking at what the planetary characters, if you will, are doing on a weekly basis, because on an individual basis, this strikes so much closer to our soul awareness in ways that, it would be foolish for me to try and, couch them in terms or words at this time. There's something far more dynamic that each of us as a soul being is invited to awaken and participate with in an individual chart consultation. So, if you want to look up Michael Mead's YouTube presentation of how not to be swamped by the overwhelm, it's there in YouTube land. So that's all I'm going to offer you for this particular week. Take it to heart, take it to soul. We're still in the season of Libra for the rest of this week. Next week, we shift. It's going to get, perhaps moving into a water sign. I get a picture of that cauldron at the back of the cave that needs to be stirred on a regular basis to make sure that the seeds of creation are being stimulated enough to keep this natural world that we live in percolating, undulating, and growing as it requires to enhance this living experience that we're a part of. So thank you. See you all next week.